All right, Chaber on Zoom, you hear me all right? Excellent. All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Iyar. Yohanan and Shushi Ehrenfeld for dedicating the shurim this month. Lezech and Nishmas, their grandfather Yosef ben Shmuel Aaron. Benjamin and Elise Wall of Netanya Eretz Yisrael, in honor and loving memory of their friend and mentor Moshe Chaim ben Tzvi Hirsch Zichron Livracha, and their Daf Yomi sponsor for today, Mrs. Tina Kaplan, in commemoration of the eyesight of Dr. Ellis Levi Eliyahu ben Rebbe Ephraim Halevi Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah, and the families a nechama. And I will say with that, let us begin. So we are picking up in Meretz Hashem. So today's daf is Samech Vav 66, and we are picking up, concluding the sugya of Pirya Verivya on Samech Hey Amud Beis 65b, and we are picking up 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 lines up from the bottom. My Haviyalo. Suppose, remember again, the Mishnah outlined a fundamental machlokes. Are women michuyavos in the mitzvah of Pirya Verivya? Are they michuyavos in the mitzvah of having children? So we had a machlokes. So the Tanna Kama said the answer is no, only men and not women. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka said that halacha l'maisa, both men and women are obligated. So the Gemara went through this machlokes a little bit, and now we're trying to figure out, so what is the resolution? So it was a very interesting Gemara. Tashma, Am Rabbi Acha bar Chanina, Am Rabbi Avo, Am Rabbi Asi, Uvda hava kamed Rabbi Yochanan biknishta de Kesari. So there was an episode that occurred in the shul in Kesari. Va'amar yotzi v'yitin ksuva. So now here's what happened over here. If you look at Rashi says Uvda hava v'hitav asa legarsha v'fisha lo hayu la banim. So the case in question over is as follows. Here was the situation. A woman came to Beis Din, and she essentially was suing for divorce. She was, when I use the word suing, I'm using it loosely. She was suing for divorce. In other words, she came to Beis Din and she said, I want a divorce and I want my ksuva. Why do I want a divorce? Because we haven't had children. So she's suing for divorce and the payment of her ksuba because she did not have children. So the Gemara says, now 1 second. Now, halacha l'maisa, if she's not obligated in Pirya Verivya, and there's no compelling reason for the divorce, then why would she be entitled to a ksuva? The fact that she could sue for divorce and ask for her ksuva because they didn't have children would seem to indicate what? That women are obligated in the mitzvah of Pirya Verivya as well. To which the Gemara says, maybe not. Dilma beba machmas taina. Maybe we're talking about a situation, ultimately, of a woman who is suing for divorce, and she's coming with a good reason. In other words, she's saying, yes, I want to get divorced because we haven't had children, and even though I may not be technically obligated in the mitzvah of Pirya Verivya, I'm going to tell you a reason why I need to have children. For example, Ki hahi da'asay l'kamed Rabbi Ami. There was a woman who came before Rabbi Ami. Amrale, she said to him, I've been in a marriage for 10 years and there are no children, and therefore I'd like a divorce. Havli ksuva, and I want my husband to pay out the ksuva. Amar la zil lo mifkedes. So he said to her, Rabbi Ami said to her, sorry, you don't have a claim. You're not obligated in the mitzvah. You can't sue for divorce based on the fact that there are no children. You don't have a mitzvah of Pirya Verivya. Amrale, she said to him, Masibu dula, mai tahavi alach. So the Gemara said, so she said to him, what's going to happen to me in my old age? In other words, what she counterclaims is, you might be right. Maybe I don't have the technical obligation of Pirya Verivya, of procreation. But Lamaisa, I need children. Why do I need children? Who's going to take care of me in my old age? Who's going to take care of me? So what she's claiming over here is, right now this marriage is not setting me up to be cared for and taken care of in my old age. As such, I have a right to sue for divorce and ultimately get my ksuba. So the Gemara says, so Amar, when Rabbi Ami heard this, he said, Kiha vaday kafina. You know what? In a situation like this, we would absolutely obligate the husband to divorce his wife and give her ksuba. So Rabbi say, what do you see from here? What you see from here is that halacha l'maisa. See, we assumed like this. Here, in our mind, here was the math. Right, there's a machlokes. Are women obligated in peri v'rivya or not? If they are, then the same way that a man could be obligated to divorce his wife after 10 years of no children and pay her ksuva, right, and get remarried, a woman could do the same thing. In other words, we'll say, but let me say to you how this could come up. Let's say you have a situation where, let's say it's a second marriage for the man, first marriage for the woman. He has kids. So 10 years later, ultimately there are no children. If she's obligated in peri v'rivya, she could then, I'm using the word sue, but you understand, I'm using it loosely. She could sue for divorce, get her ksuba, say, listen, I have a mitzvah, we're not fulfilling it over here. Pay me my ksuba and let me go ahead and get divorced. And again, conversely, if she's not obligated in the mitzvah peri v'rivya, she couldn't sue for divorce based on the fact that there are no children. The Gemara says, well, maybe there's another column over here. The other column is, even if a woman is not obligated to have children, she quote unquote needs children. Why needs children? So in this case, where the taina is, who's going to take care of me in my old age? In other words, that children represent a certain level of what we'll call an insurance policy for the children, for the parent. So that could be a reason, even if she's not obligated, that would be a taina that would allow for her to sue for divorce. The Gemara tells another story. There was another woman who came before Rav Nachman, Amarla, and I was with the same thing. 10 years of no children, she wants to sue for divorce. Amarla, so Rav Nachman says to her, Lo mifkaret, you're not obligated in the mitzvah. So because you're not obligated in the mitzvah, therefore halacha l'maisa, there's no need for you to go ahead and sue for divorce. And if you want to sue for divorce, who says you're going to be entitled to ksuba? Amrali, she said to him, Lo bayahach isisa chutra liyada umar lekvura. So this is interesting. So she responds back, does this woman not need a staff for her hand and a shovel for her burial? It's the same yesod. Who's going to take care of me in my old age? Who's going to take care of me in my old age? That's the yesod. So I'll say, first of all, it just happens to be a fascinating idea over here about how mothers and fathers sometimes have different conceptions of the roles their children play. When fathers look at their children, fathers often see children as a vehicle to fulfill unfulfilled dreams, right? I had things I wanted to accomplish in life. I didn't get to accomplish them. Ultimately, again, my child is going to be the mechanism through which I actualize it, which, by the way, could be good and sometimes could be incredibly unhealthy when fathers especially try to drive their children in certain ways. Mothers, on the other hand, a mother is all nurturing, right? A mother is all loving. So the only expectation that a mother has of her children is what? I took care of you, you'll take care of me. I took care of you, you'll take care of me. It's such an incredible idea. I nurtured you when you were young. When I get old, I may not be self-sufficient. So all I ask is that you be there for me in my old age. And I will say, it tells you another yesod. That what's the obligation of a child? The obligation of a child is to be there for their parents in their old age. Right? That's the other yesod. You know, there's so much discussed in the postgame. There are some times when children can't care for parents, or children can't give their parents the level of care the parents require. In that case, there's certainly a mitzvah to outsource the care of the parents. But you see that the primary obligation to literally, again, be the walking staff for the mother, to be the support for the father, ultimately is the schus of the child. So it's a fascinating Gemara because it teaches you, number one, kind of how parents view their children, and ultimately teaches us that the most awesome responsibility that a child has towards his or her parents in old age is to be that staff, to be that staff for that walking staff, that support staff. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Amar kihav vaday kaifina. So Rav Nachman said, interestingly enough, you know what? In this kind of case, the woman has a good taina. She's saying good, and therefore in that type of situation, we would in fact force the husband to go ahead and divorce her and give her ksuva so that this woman could move on, get married, and establish a family. Incredible. So Yehuda v'Chizkiya is an incredible story. Yehuda v'Chizkiya tu'umim hayu. Yehuda and Chizkiya were twins. So the Gemara says, Echa nigmara tzuras l'sof tisha, ve'echa nigmara tzuras l'tchilas shiva. So interestingly enough, they developed in utero at different stages, right? They were twins, but one was quote unquote fully formed at the end of 7 months, one was fully formed at the end of 9 months. Okay, Gemara Masechus Nida, how exactly this was, they assessed this. Okay, leaving that aside. So what happened? Yehudis tevisud Rabbi Chia. So Yehudis, the wife of Rabbi Chia. So I'll say, so just so we get the family right over here. Yehuda and Chizkiya were the sons of Rabbi Chia. The sons of Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia's wife was Yehudis. So Yehudis is the mother of Yehuda and Chizkiya. So Yehudis, Rabbi Chia's wife, Havelet Sar Leda. She had incredibly difficult pregnancies. We're going to see she actually had 2 pregnancies. She had incredibly difficult pregnancies to the point that she did not want to have any more children. So look what she does. Shanoi mana v'asek mit Rabbi Chia. So she changed her clothing and she came before Rabbi Chia, her husband, to ask a shaila. So I say this is just fascinating. So what does she do? She disguises herself to ask a shaila from her husband. Because as wives of rabbis often know, right, the wife gets one answer and the community gets the rest of it, a different answer. So what happens? So she disguises herself. She comes to her husband. She asks him the following: Amra, is this some fact that Perivarivia? Said Rabbi, I have a shayla, right? Ultimately, again, is a woman obligated in Perivarivia, procreation? Amar lo. He said to her no. Azla ashtia samada akarta. She went ahead and she drank some concoction that made her sterile. She said, okay, I asked my local Orthodox rabbi, right? I got my psak. Women are not obligated. So she drank this thing that became sterile. L'sofig milsa. Rabbi Chia then found out what happened. Amrale aichu or aiko yaladas li chada kresa achrisa. If only she would have given me one more wombful of children. Now, what did he say? He was lamenting. Look, he was lamenting that I wish we could have had just one more wombful. Now, why does he use lashon of wombful? The Amar Mar Yehuda v'Chizkiya achi pazi v'tavi achvasa. So I will say, because interestingly enough, Rabbi Chia had 2 sets of twins, a set of twin boys and a set of twin girls. So Yehuda and Chizkiya were the brothers, and Pazi and Tavi were sisters. That's why he uses the lashon. If only Yehudis would have given me one more womb full of children, then that how wonderful that would have been. But I will point out something very interesting over here. Well, actually, let's finish the Gemara, and then we'll come back to this, because this notion of a woman sterilizing herself is an interesting discussion in halacha as well. We'll come back to that in just a moment. So the Gemara says, is that true that women are not obligated in perivarivia and procreation? There was once an episode of a woman who was half slave, half free. So we know, how do you have this case? Excellent. Shutzfim, 2 Jewish partners who own an Eved Kenani jointly own an Eved Kenani. Reuven emancipates his part. Shimon doesn't emancipate his part. So you have someone who is half free, half slave. The problem, of course, with such a person is that halacha l'maisa, they cannot marry. So the Gemara says, v'kafa es rabba v'asa bas chorin. They forced, so in this case, the Beis Din forced Shimon, the remaining partner who still owned a part in the Evet, to emancipate his chelek. So I will say, the Gemara assumes, why did Beis Din force Shimon to emancipate his chelek? Look at Rashi. V'asa bas chorin, kadei shetei muteres linose. So we assume the reason they forced Shimon to emancipate his part was so that the maidservant should be able to marry. Why should she be able to marry? Because of perivarivia, alma mefakta. You see from here that halacha l'maisa, a woman is obligated in perivarivia. To which the Gemara says, no, that was for a different case. The Gemara says, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak minag hefker naguba. It was different there. It was different because she was acting in an immoral way, or people were acting immorally with her. Because she was still partly living in the slave world, therefore halacha l'maisa, there was immoral stuff going on. In order to allow her to live a life of immorality, they force the remaining master to go ahead and emancipate her. So I will say, bottom line, halacha l'maaseh, we paskin, a woman is not obligated in peri v'rivya. Only a man has obligation of procreation. A woman does not. Now, both say the Gemara threw in here what we call sirus isha, about what. So, if a woman is not obligated in going ahead and peri v'rivya, is she permitted to sterilize herself? So, both say that's a whole other discussion. Sirus isha, a woman sterilizing herself, is still a halachic problem. So this comes up all the time. Woman wants to have tubal ligation. Or again, in the times of the Gemara, they used to have this drink that would just sterilize. So sirus, sterilization, is a different halachic issue that is independent of one's obligation for perivarivya. A woman is not permitted to sterilize herself. Obviously, if there are health-related issues or things like that, that's different. But halacha l'maaseh, we don't group the two together. So even though we paskin that a woman is not obligated ultimately in perivarivya and procreation, halacha l'maaseh, the prohibition of sirus, of sterilization, would still apply to her. Hadjun alach, haba'a yivim trabosai, mazel tov. New sugya, really incredible sugya. Here we go. Almana l'kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedyot. So we'll say, here's the case. You have an almana who's married to a kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza who are married to a kohen hedyot. So obviously, we'll say illegal marriages, right? Illegal marriages. Kohen is not permitted to go ahead and marry these women. Then I will say the Mishnah's focus over here is going to be something very interesting and very specific. Hechnisa lo avdei malog va'avdei tzon barzal. So I will say, listen to this. The question, and it's interesting that there's a Mishnah devoted to this, but the Mishnah's question is as follows. A Kohen, right? A Kohen eats truma. Not only that, family members of a Kohen eat truma. Not only that, people owned by a Kohen also eat truma. So in this case, we're dealing with a fascinating situation. A Kohen engages in an illegal marriage. Now remember again about Sevi Paskin, Kedushin Tovsin B'Chavei Lavin, which means that halacha l'maisa, so even if you engage in an illegal marriage, as long as it's only punishable by a lav, the marriage works. Asr, but it works. What we're going to speak about in this Mishnah is, let's say the woman comes in with slaves, with servants. What's their allowance in terms of truma? So there's an illegal marriage, but that works. In other words, that works is that it's a legally binding marriage. Do the slaves have the ability to go ahead and eat truma? Now, I'll say one more piece. The other piece is that in a marriage, there are two types of property that a woman brings into a marriage, what we call nichsei malug, nichsei tzon barzel. Nichsei malug is like the classic property, which means she brings it in, it's hers. Husband has usage rights for the duration of the marriage. Upon the event of death or divorce, that property goes back to the woman. Now, whether there was a depreciation, appreciation, it doesn't matter. Whatever is left at the end of the marriage is what she gets back. For argument's sake, if there's nothing left, however that happens, she gets nothing back. So she retains title the entire time, he gets usage. Nichsei tzon barzel, literally again like iron sheep. It's called iron because you'll see why in just a moment. Nichsei tzon barzel is like this. Woman brings it into the marriage. Value of that property is assessed. Husband guarantees the value of that property upon death or dissolution of the marriage. So if that property appreciates, the husband gets that gain. Property depreciates, husband swallows the loss. But he has locked in the value of the property. Again, she retains title, so to speak. He gets usage. But Lamaisa Nichsei Tzon Barzel, he's guaranteed value. He's guaranteed the value. So here we go. Samana l'kohen gadol grusha v'chotz l'kohen hedyot hechnisa lo avdei malog. If she brought in avdei malog, right, nichsei malog, which I will say. So once again, those are slaves that she's going to retain title to. He is going to get usage of them over the course of the marriage, or avdei tzon barzel, or for that matter, against slaves, where he has guaranteed the value and also has usage. Avdei malug lo yochelu b'truma, so avdei malug can't eat truma. Avdei tzon barzel yochelu. Avdei tzon barzel are allowed to eat. Now, we're going to see, I'm going to tell you this outside, I'm going to see in Rashi, the fundamental distinction is, avdei malug are considered to be whose property? The woman's. the woman's. Now, because the woman is in an illegal marriage with a Kohen, therefore, again, her servants don't get to eat. Avdei Tzon Barzel, interestingly enough, in halacha, are viewed as whose property? The husband's. Now, the reason for that is since he guaranteed the value, essentially, they become like his. Even though, again, I want to be clear, title never leaves the woman. But because he guarantees value, they really become his. And therefore, interestingly enough, they're considered to be like his avadim. Therefore, they could eat truma. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Ve'elu hein avdei malog. We will say, what's an example of avdei malog? Imesu, for example, let's say the servants die. Mesula, she swallows the loss. Vimosiru, and if they appreciate, hosirala, she gets the appreciation. Afa pishu chai b'mizonosan, hari elu lo yochelu b'truma. Even though Rabbi say who's obligated to feed the slaves, right? Who's obligated to sustain them? The husband. The husband. Nevertheless, because ultimately, again, complete and full title resides with her, and loss or profit from the slaves resides with her, therefore they're hers. Because they're hers, she's in a legal marriage, and because just like she can't eat truma, her slaves can't eat truma. Conversely, ve'elohein avdei tzon barzel. What are avdei tzon barzel? Imesu mesulo. Remember again, avdei tzon barzel, husband guarantees the value. If they die, who swallows the loss? He does. Right? Vimosiro hosirlo, and if they appreciate, he gets the appreciation. Therefore, holavu chai bachriyus son hari elu shalo. Rabbi say, here's what it comes down to. Because he has the achrayas, because he has the complete responsibility for their value, therefore they are considered to be his. Because they're considered to be his, we look at them almost independently of the illegal marriage, and therefore halacha l'maisa hare elu yochlu b'truma. They are permitted to go ahead and eat truma. I will say, let's take a quick look at Rashi. Tap Rashi in the Mishnah very quickly. Amar lekohen god l'chnisla avdei malog. Masha isha here. I want to show it to you inside. Masha isha machneses labayla v'shamalo lekabla malav ba'achrayis ksuva. That property which a woman brings into a marriage, and they assess the value of that property, and the husband accepts the achrayis for the value of that property, and we write it in the ksuva. Now, we'll say, by the way, to this very day, we write this in a ksuva. The dan dunya dan halasle, we write mi be'avua, mi be'nasha, right? Property that she brings in. I will say now, in our contemporary ksuvas, we just ascribe an arbitrary value to this, right? But in the times of the Gemara, times of the Mishnah, they would write the dunya dan halasle be'avua, the property that she's bringing in from her father's home, and it's worth 3,000 zuz, and we would put that value in the ksuva, and the husband guarantees the value of that property. That's called nichsei tzon barzel. V'mosif kinegdan, and sometimes the husband will also add on a corresponding part. The kosef sacha kol kibel alav ploni kach v'kach b'ksuvasa korin tzon barzel. Both say that's called tzon barzel. Nichsei tzon barzel, iron sheep of property. She brings it in. We evaluate it, lock in the value, husband guarantees the value. Property goes up, property goes down, doesn't make a difference. Husband is locked into that value. The Mishnah views that almost as if it's the husband's property, because he's taking complete achrayis. V'yesh shemachneses mamon harbe ve'ino koseves kula b'ksuvasa u'misheres liatzma hey nichsei malog. So we'll say another type of property. Woman brings into the marriage where halacha l'maisa we don't evaluate it. And it's not even written into the ksuva, right? Woman retains full title. Husband gets to go ahead and enjoy usage. Hey nichsei malog v'aba ochol peros v'keren shalah. Right? Ultimately, again, the husband enjoys usage, and the principal is hers. V'mesu, mesula, if they die, it's her loss. Impachsu, paksula, lashon, so good. So both I said that's our introduction, ultimately, again, to tzon barzel, and nichsei tzon barzel, nichsei malog. Incredible. Also, let's go back to the Mishnah. Bas Yisrael sheni says l'kohen. So if a Bas Yisrael marries her, both say here's a case of a legal marriage. Strange to come across this in Yevamos, right? This is a case of a legal marriage. A regular Bas Yisrael who marries a Kohen. Regular Bas Yisrael marries a Kohen. V'chniso lo avodim. And ultimately she brings slaves into the marriage. Bein avdei melog, bein avdei tzon barzel, hare elu yochlu b'shuma. Rabbi say whether these slaves are nichsei malug or nichsei tzom barzel, they're permitted to eat truma. Why? Rabbi say why? Because she's permitted to eat truma. Rabbi say, remember again, the only reason in the first case in the Mishnah why we are distinguishing between avadim who are nichsei malug and nichsei tzom barzel is why? It's an illegal marriage, right? So remember again, essentially what we say is slaves who are her property can't eat truma, because she can't eat truma, right? It's an illegal marriage. Slaves that are looked at in halacha as his property, i.e. nichsei tzom barzel, those can eat truma. All the Mishnah is saying is, in a typical case of a legal marriage, where a Bas Yisrael marries a Kohen, then Rabbi say she's entitled to eat truma, and all of the avadim can. Rabbi say for one simple reason: who's allowed to eat truma? Anyone, ultimately who is owned by a Kohen. Is owned by a Kohen. And in this case over here, all of the slaves come into a permitted marriage, and therefore they are all permitted to eat truma. Ubas Kohen, well, say, by the way, it is fascinating. I've always found this riveting, that, I'm a Yisrael. If I eat truma, there is a very severe penalty of kares, a very severe penalty of misa. Yet a slave owned by a Kohen, right, a slave who's not fully Jewish, is permitted to eat truma. It's fascinating. I will say, I think there's an incredible Musar Haskell in it. What's the difference between me, right, and a slave who's living in a Kohen's home? The difference is proximity to the Kedusha of the Kahuna. I will say, you see how powerful it is to live in proximity to Kedusha, and the effect and the impact that our surroundings have on us. All too often in life, we think that it's only what we do, how we act and how we behave, that creates the Kedusha, the holiness around us. But our surroundings, it doesn't matter so much, right? In other words, I could kind of divorce who I become from my surroundings, and it's not true. The people we surround ourselves with, the situations we put ourselves in, have a direct impact on who and what we are. Vaharaya, an Eved Kenani who lives in the home of a Kohen who is the paradigm of day-to-day Kedusha, an Eved Kenani who lives in that home, he's impacted by that. And to a certain degree, he's impacted in ways that I, a Yisrael, am not. And because he has that impact of constant and consistent proximity to Kedusha, he's permitted to eat truma and I'm not. Now, of course, there's a technical reason, but I'm saying, but derech hashkafa, you see the incredible power of putting yourself in an atmosphere of Kedusha. Incredible. But say, last case in the Mishnah, Bas Kohen Sheni says to Yisrael. So I'll say this is the opposite case. This is a Bas Kohen. Remember again, when she was living in her father's home, she was able to eat truma. Now I don't want to say she married down, but she married down, right? She married Yisrael. Bas Kohen Sheni says to Yisrael, Ve'echnisa lo avadim, and she brings slaves into the marriage. Ben avdei malug, ben avdei tzom barzel, hare elu lo yochlu b'truma. Shabbos said these last two cases are very intuitive, right? Salocha l'maisa, we're talking about a legal marriage of, let's say, a Bas Yisrael to a Kohen. All the avadim can eat truma. If a Bas Kohen was bringing in slaves, so also remember again, those slaves, when she was single, were eating truma because they were part of her father's home. Now she marries the Yisrael. Obviously, they cannot continue to eat truma. Incredible. Good. So we'll say, let's go back. It says the Gemara, the avdei malug lo yochelu b'truma. Amai. So we'll say, let's go back. Let's go back to the first case, right? So we'll say, the first case in the Mishnah, you have an almana marrying a Kohen Gadol. Illegal marriage. She's bringing in avadim. So we'll say, that's a little bit of chazara. Can the avadim eat truma? In that first case, can the avadim eat truma? I'll give you a hint. We learned it 90 seconds ago. Right? So we'll say, the answer is, it depends. It depends on what type of avadim. Right? Remember again, nichsei melug cannot eat truma. Why? Because remember again, from the Mishnah's perspective, they're considered to be whose property? Hers. Right? And because she's engaged in an illegal marriage, therefore they can't eat. Nichsei avdei tzon barzel can eat truma because they are considered to be his property. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. Why can't Avdei Malug eat truma? We'll say in the case of an almana, bringing in Avdei Malug into the marriage with a Kohen Gadol, even the Avdei Malug should be permitted. Why? Listen to this. Lehave ki kinyano shekana kinyan. We'll say, listen to this. They should be like the case of an acquisition, which acquired an acquisition, right? Literally, someone who was acquired by the Kohen, who acquired someone in return. And this sign, you'll say, here we go. Minayin leKohen shenase isha v'kana avadim sheyochlu b'truma. We'll say, how do I know about a case of a Kohen who went ahead and married a woman, right? And she acquired avadim, that those avadim are permitted to eat truma. Shneimar v'Kohen ki yikne nefesh kinyan kaspo hu yochal bo. Because the pasuk says, if a Kohen will acquire someone, right? Kinyan kaspo, kinyan through kasef, acquiring someone, Rabbi say, monetarily, ultimately again allows them to eat truma. Uminayin liisha shekansa avadim. How do I know that if the woman went ahead and acquired avadim, or avadav shekanu avadim? What's the interesting case? You have some entrepreneurial avadim kinanim who themselves purchase avadim, right? How do you know that even slaves purchased by slaves? Suppose say, I have avadim kinanim, I have avadim kinanim purchase, whatever the mechanism for doing that is, how do I know that ultimately, again, those slaves purchased by my slaves also have the ability to eat truma? Shenemar v'Kohen ki yikne nefesh kinyan kasbo hu yochabo kinyano shekana kinyan ochal. Ultimately, again, even someone I own who acquires someone else is also permitted to eat truma. So we'll say it creates the following picture, which is someone who is related to a Kohen obviously can eat truma. Someone who is acquired by a Kohen, which we'll say, by the way, includes wife. Why does it include wife? Because halacha l'maisa, a wife is also acquired during kiddushin. So a wife is permitted. My eved is permitted to eat truma because my eved ultimately again is halacha l'maisa kinyan kaspo, right? Kinyan kaspo. And not only that, but even if my eved acquires someone, that person who my eved acquires is also permitted to eat truma. So I will say, if that's the case, what picture does that paint? What picture does that paint? That anyone who is financially linked to the Kohen, at the end of the day, is permitted to eat truma. Now I will say, is there a financial linkage between the Kohen and the avdei malug that his wife brings into the marriage? Absolutely. Why? Because the Kohen has complete usage. Does that not check the box of kinyan kaspo? And if so, should allow even the avdei malug to eat truma. Such a good kasha. Such a good kasha. To which the Gemara says, now both say, yeah, okay, we're not going to get into the technicalities in this case, we'll go weiter. To which the Gemara says, Kala ochel ma'achil, kol she'in ochel eno ma'achilo. So we'll say, that's true, but there's another principle. Principle number one is that halacha l'maisa. Well, principle one is if you're related to a Kohen eating truma. Principle two is if you're owned or enjoy a financial relationship, right? But it's we'll call owned by the Kohen, you eat truma. Not only that, but if you're owned by someone who's owned by the Kohen, you also eat truma. But I will say there's one more piece. It is only someone who themselves who are eating truma who could enable someone else to eat truma. So for example, when we speak about the case of an eved who buys an eved who buys an eved, right? So therefore again, that bought eved, that second eved who's now owned by another eved, he could eat truma. That's true when? When the purchasing eved has a right to eat truma. But if the purchasing eved can't eat truma, then obviously he can't pass down that right to an eved who is eating. So therefore, again, Abosai, once we establish that avadim of michse malug cannot eat truma, or once we establish ultimately again that even the wife in this question can't eat truma, then obviously the eved won't be able to eat truma as well. Incredible. So the Gemara goes right to the Gemara says, is that true? Is that true that only someone who could eat truma could go ahead and pass that right on to someone else? For Arel, the cholatmeim, shinan ochlen, umit uma'achilin. Rabbi said, listen to this case. This is fascinating. Look at Rashi. Arel. Rashi says, Arel, Kohen Arel, Eino ochel, va'avad ochel. Rabbi, listen to this. Let's say you have a Kohen who is uncircumcised, or a Kohen who is tameh for that matter. Rabbi said, these are cases. Could a Kohen who is an Arel or a Kohen who is tameh eat truma? Can they eat truma? No. Yet Rabbi say, who can eat truma? They're servants. Isn't that fascinating? So you see over here that what? Even if you can't eat yourself, lemaisa, you could enable someone else to eat truma. So why don't we say, so the Gemara says, so therefore again, halacha lemaisa, you could have a situation where even if the wife can't eat, the Avdei Malug, right? I will say again, we're not talking about the Avdei Tzon Barzell. Why aren't we even talking about the Avdei Tzon Barzell? Why aren't we discussing them? Because again, the Mishnah already said they're considered to be like the real property of the husband. Why? Why? Because he's on the hook for their value. So therefore, they're like the real property. The question becomes in the Avdei Malug. So again, we're looking at those as the property of the wife. So because they're the property of the wife, she can't eat, therefore they can't eat. What the Gemara is saying, why? I don't understand. Those avodim enjoy a financial relationship with the husband. If so, they should be permitted to eat. So the Gemara is suggesting, well, no, because their owner can't eat, therefore, again, they can't eat. To which the Gemara is challenging that. That's not true. Sometimes the primary individual, the primary enabler of truma consumption can't eat, but yet, again, they can still convey the right for truma consumption to another person. For example, the Kohen is an Orel. The Kohen is Tameh. He can't eat, yet his avadim still can't. Which means that's not a good comparison. I'll tell you why. Hasan pumayu kaivle. You know what? When the Kohen is an Orel, or the Kohen is Tameh, you know what we consider that to be like? That's like a Kohen who has a bad toothache, right? If the Kohen has a bad toothache, he's not eating truma. He's not eating truma. Now we'll say, why isn't he eating truma? Because he has a circumstance which is precluding him to eat. So we'll say that's how we view an Aral and a Kohen who's Tameh. They, technically speaking, have an entitlement. There is an impediment to their consumption. The impediment is the foreskin, the arla. The impediment is the tuma. But again, we view them as being entitled to eat. Okay, v'hari mamzer. What about the case of a mamzer? So we'll say this is incredible. She'ein ochel u'ma'achil. We'll say a mamzer on one hand obviously can't eat truma, but yet a mamzer enables others to eat truma. Now we'll say, now how does a mamzer enable others? This is a pretty wild case. Look at Rashi, v'hari mamzer, right across. Right across, to which the Gemara says, Bas Yisrael Shenises, look, listen to the case. A Bas Yisrael marries a Kohen, V'yolda Bas, they have a daughter, V'habas Nises L'mamzer, and the daughter marries a mamzer, right, illegal marriage, V'yolda Ben, and now daughter and mamzer husband, they have a kid. And I will say, what's the nature of what's the status of a child who is a product of a regular woman and a mamzer? Mamzer. Right? Mamzerus is passed down. Umeisa, now watch this. Umeisa, now the daughter dies. V'haben kayum. And now ultimately the mamzer grandson is still alive. V'hareim imo eishes kohen ocheles b'shvilo truma la'achar misas baila. Shlefi sheyesh la zera min hakabos. It's actually a pretty wild case. So let me just illustrate this for you for just a moment. We'll call her Bas Yisrael marries a Kohen. Okay, Bas Yisrael marries a Kohen. They have a daughter. Okay, good. Daughter marries a mamzer. Right? They have a son. We'll call him now Little Mamzer. Right? So now Little Mamzer is there, right? Little Mamzer is there. So now what happens? The Kohen, grandfather of Little Mamzer, dies. So we'll say, so now watch this. When a woman, now the problem, one step beforehand. Daughter dies first. Okay, daughter dies first. Now we'll say what happens? Then Kohen, grandfather, dies. Now we have Bas Yisrael is a widow. The halacha is as follows. Bas Yisrael, that's a widow. If there are no children from her Kohanic husband, she is not entitled to eat truma. If she does have children from her Kohanic husband, that enables her to continue to eat truma. In this case over here, her daughter died, but who is still alive? Who's still alive? Little Mamzer. Well, I say, listen to this. The existence of Little Mamzer allows her to eat truma. Now, I say, isn't that incredible? When Little Mamzer comes over, is he allowed to eat truma? No. Little Mamzer is a Little Mamzer, right? Kishmo Kenhu, right? And therefore, again, he is not allowed to eat truma. Yet, Rabbi say something amazing happens. The existence of Little Mamzer allows or enables his grandmother to continue to eat truma. Wow, what a case. So what do you see from here? You could have someone who himself is unable to eat truma, right? And yet what? Enables someone else to eat truma. So once again, the Gemara says, I understand the woman in this case, the almana who's married to the Kohen Gadol, she can't eat truma, but why wouldn't she enable her avdei malug to eat truma? Or why wouldn't the marriage enable the avdei malug to eat truma? To which the Gemara says, kinyan ochel. So the Gemara says, someone who is a kinyan is able to go ahead and kinyan ochel kamar, kinyan ochel ma'achil. She'ena ochel, Eino Ma'achil. So Rabbi say comes along Ravina, and Ravina says like this. The reality is as follows. Halacha l'maisa, someone who is acquired and has the ability to eat, has the ability to convey that right to someone else. But someone who is acquired and doesn't have the ability to eat cannot convey that to someone else. That's Ravina's position. Rava Amar, Rava says, Rava comes around full circle and says, no, let's be honest. Midaraisa, mecha achli. I will say midaraisa, even avdei malug should be able to eat truma. Right? I will say, why should avdei malug be able to eat truma? Because halacha l'maisa, they enjoy a financial relationship to the Kohanic husband. Listen to this. The Rabbanan stepped in and say, we don't want the avdei malug to eat truma. And I'll tell you why, Abba saying. Because we want the woman to get out of this marriage. We want to make it uncomfortable for her. Because remember, again, this is an illegal marriage. This is an almana to a kohen gadol. Watch this. What is she going to say? Kadesh tomar, ani eini ocheles. She'll look at around the circus. She said, listen, now I married the kohen gadol, and yet I, the wife, can't eat truma. Avadai, my servants, right, my avdei malug, einon ochlen, can't eat truma. Zona hi etzla. I guess I must just be like his zona. In other words, Rabbi say, when the wife, the amana, looks around at her circumstances, it's going to make her uncomfortable. Right? Why? Because Lamaisa, she's going to see she's not a real wife. She's not a real wife. Because there are certain entitlements that a wife would have, and she does not have them. The hope is that this will make her feel like, I guess I'm not a wife, I'm just a zona. Right? And in other words, that I have none of the rights that a normal wife would have. Hilchach asilaf kua. And hopefully this will lead to the dissolution of the marriage. So I will say, remember again, this is an illegal marriage. We want them to get divorced. So essentially what Rav is saying is really fascinating. Really make it, I think you're right. Not just Avdei Tzon Barza, but even Avdei Malug should be able to eat Truma. Because Halach Lamaisa, anyone who is financially related to the Kohen has the right to eat Truma. Chazal stepped in and said, we don't want the Avdei Malug. Right? Because again, we want her to feel uncomfortable. We want her to look around at its marriage and to see how wrong it is, and hopefully that'll lead to the dissolution. Rav Ashi Amar, Rav Ashi says the truth is there's another reason. If we allow Avdei Malug to eat Truma while the husband is alive, the concern is they may come to eat it even after the husband is dead. And I was saying that's a real problem. So we'll say, why are we worried about that in a general case? Of a Bas Yisrael who marries a Kohen, we should say that halacha l'maisa, even her avdei malug shouldn't be able to eat truma, out of the concern that when the husband dies, they're going to continue to eat truma. To which the Gemara says, Amar Avashi, you're right. Ba'amana kohenes da'asya la'ruye meikara achli b'truma. I'm sorry. Ba'amana kohenes da'asya la'ruye. We're talking about a very specific situation where we're talking about an amana. We'll say, what's the case in the Mishnah? A Kohen Gadol who married an Almana, but an Almana herself from a Kohanic family. This woman, we're concerned that she's going to justify the continued consumption of Truma by her Avdei Malog. Why? Meikara achli b'Truma de Beinasha. Originally, when I was single, ultimately again, my Avadim ate from the Truma of my father's home. In Sibile lahai achli b'Truma de Gavrai. Now I married the Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen Gadol ultimately again, my slaves ate Truma in his home. And what's going to happen? And therefore, when her husband died, she's going to assume the hashta hadri the milsa kamaisa. She's going to assume, okay, I'm right back where I started, right? Like before my marriage, my avadim were eating truma. Now also they can eat truma. V'lo yada, she's not going to realize the meikara lo shavisi lenafshi chalala. In the beginning, before she got married to the Kohen Gadol, she was just a widow, and again, the daughter of a Kohen. That's why her avadim were eating truma. Now that she illegally married a Kohen Gadol, she is a chalala. And as a chalala, hashta shavisi nafshi chalala. Ultimately, again, she's now a chalala, and therefore, again, she can't eat truma, and her avadim can't eat truma. Teinach amana kohenes. So that makes sense if you're setting up the case of the Mishnah of an amana kohenes who married the Kohen Gadol. Amana bas Yisrael ma'ikal meimar. But I will say, what's the concern in a case of amanas bas Yisrael? So to which the Gemara says, ba'amanusa lo paligrabanon. I will say, we did not start sparsing halachas in a case of amana. Rather, we treat all cases of amana the same. So therefore, I will say, what it comes out over here is as follows. No one's disputing the halacha. The halacha is that when there is an illegal marriage to a Kohen, okay, and the woman in question is bringing in avadim, fundamental question, can the avadim eat truma or not? the Mishnah makes a distinction. If they're avdei tzom barzel, where essentially the husband assumes complete responsibility for their value, they become like the property of the husband, the Kohen, and therefore they can eat truma. When they are avdei malug, avdei nichse malug, ultimately, again, in that case, the husband gets usage, but does not assume responsibility for the value. Those are the property of the woman, and ultimately, again, cannot eat truma. I will say, what we have demonstrated from the Gemara is that really mid'oraisa, even avdei malug should be able to eat truma, because anyone who is financially linked to the Kohen has the right to eat truma. We've just seen multiple different things that Chazal were concerned about, and therefore Chazal stepped in and prohibited avdei malug from consuming truma, either because we want to make the woman uncomfortable, or we're actually concerned that after the death of the Kohen, the woman is going to think that the avodim can continue to eat truma, when in fact that is not true. Okay, good. Rabbi says that's the first piece of halacha. Itmar, interesting case. Hamach neses shum labayla hiomeres klianino teles vu omer damimanino sein hadinimi. Rabbi say this is a fascinating case. Watch this. Watch this. Let's say a woman brings in property into a marriage. Forgive us, ladies, for just a moment. She brings in a Rolex watch, right? She brings in a Rolex watch, and what happens? It's worth $20,000. Okay. Now they're getting divorced. Okay. So I'll say, so what happens when you get divorced? Husband has an obligation to give back the property. He says, I'm not giving the property. I'll give you $20,000. Right? I like the watch. Right? I've gotten used to wearing the watch. It's nice. Right? I'm not giving you the watch, but I'm going to give you the money. I guaranteed a watch for $20,000. Here's a check, $20,000. What does she say? I want the watch. It's a family heirloom, right? That was my father's watch, my grandfather's watch, my great-grandfather's watch. I want the watch. Shabbos Gemara says, who hadinimi? Who does the halacha side with? In other words, what's the halacha? And we'll say such a fundamental case. What's the halacha in this case? Look at Rashi. V'hi omer is clearly no tell us. Last Rashi in the daf. Kimo shekibalti alai b'shuma o me'asin ba'achriyusi v'shalihim. The husband essentially is saying is, wife, once you brought this watch into the marriage and I guaranteed the value, essentially what happened? The watch became mine. The watch became mine. I'm only on the hook for the value, not for the watch. So I'm keeping the watch. Here's the check for $20,000. She says, no. She says, you guaranteed the item. Obviously, if the item were not to be in existence, you'd have to pay me the money. But Lamai, if the item is in existence, I have the right to take that back. So what's that? Who's the halacha with? Rabbi Yehuda says, hadin ima. Rabbi Yehuda says the halacha is with her. Namely, Rabbi say again that she has the right to take back the watch. Rabbi Ami Amar hadin imo. I'll say very exciting game, all right? This feels like a lamdesh of sugi. Rabbi Ami says, no, the din is with him. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, we'll say to be clear, he's obligated for the $20,000, right? But he's allowed to keep the watch. So let's analyze. So this is what I'll say, let's analyze the positions. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Adin Ima. Rabbi Yehuda says the halacha is with her. Why? Listen to this phrase. Shevach beis aviha didahi. The Rabbi say the lashon over here is something very interesting. Shevach beis aviha means property that she brought from her father's home, she has a connection to. In other words, both say, this is not just stam property. It could be dowry, it could be other things. The point over here is, there's a familial connection she has to this property. So it's understood that, of course, if this property is still in existence at the time of the dissolution of the marriage, that property is hers. Shavach beis avia dida, which literally means the property of her father's home, she has a connection to. Rabbi Ami Amar hadinimo. Rabbi Ami says, no, the din is with him. Kevin Damar im mesu lo v'mosiro husiru lo hoil v'chai bachar yusin yochelu. Rabbi Ami says something amazing. Who has complete, total, and absolute responsibility for this property when she brings it into the marriage? Who has it? He does. So if it appreciates, the appreciation is his. If it depreciates, the depreciation is. We'll say, if somebody steals the Rolex, what's the halacha? Who's on the hook? He is. Rabbi Ami sees this type of absolute achrayis responsibility essentially as what? Ownership. Such a fascinating yesod. Absolute responsibility means ownership. Says the Gemara. Says this is machlokes. What a great machlokes. Amar of Safra. Mikatani vehein shalo. Rav Safra says, first of all, Rabbi Ami, calm down. Right? You're looking at achrayis as ownership. Rabbi will say, does the Gemara say that when he takes achrayus, the item belongs to him? It doesn't say that, right? It never says v'hein shalo. I'm sorry, mikatani v'hein shalo hol v'chai ba'achrayusan. I'm sorry, v'hein shalo. Does it say that they're his? Hol v'chai ba'achrayusan katani. Uli olam lav dideinidhu. So we'll say essentially, Rav Safras pushing back Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami, that's a big jump. That's a big jump. All the Gemara tells us is that when a woman brings in nichseit son barzel, the husband assumes complete responsibility for that item. But complete responsibility does not translate into ownership. That's a jump. That's a jump. Complete responsibility means just that. You're completely responsible for the item. But in no way does that convey to you ownership. So I'll say, is that true that in any situation, ultimately, and I will say now, just to be clear, we're jumping back for just a moment. So we're stopping here. Here's our machlokes, right? So our machlokes is nichseit son barzel. Woman brings into the marriage the Rolex, right? Nichseit son barzel means it's written in the ksuva. I'm bringing a Rolex into the marriage that's worth $20,000. Husband agrees to take full responsibility for the value. Now they're getting divorced. She wants the watch. He says, no, here's $20,000. So who does the halacha follow? So again, you have Rabbi Huda saying hers, shevach beis avia ima. Rabbi Ami saying no, since he took complete achrayus is tantamount to ownership. So we'll say, so now let's take a step back for just a moment. Now the Gemara is saying, oh, okay, so now I get it. When the woman brought in avdei son barzel, right, servants, son barzel servants, they were allowed to eat truma. Why? Now we understand. Because since the husband has complete achrayus, therefore what? It's as if he owns them, right? And therefore halacha l'maisa, they eat truma. To which the Gemara, is that true? So any situation where a Kohen has achrayus, right? They eat truma. Now we learn. Here we go. Yisrael shesachar para mi Kohen. Listen to this case. A Yisrael rents a cow from a Kohen. Harezeh yachilenu karshine truma. Rabbi say, listen to this. Can Yisrael feed the cow of a Kohen truma? Now remember, normally the animals of a Kohen are permitted to eat truma. So I'm Yisrael. I rented a cow from a Kohen. I want to feed. This is great. I'll just feed him truma, right? Instead of giving away my truma to a Kohen, I'm just going to use my truma to go ahead and feed this animal. Is that permitted? To which the Gemara says, yes. Yes, why? I will say why. Because Lamaisa, even though Ami Yisrael renting the animal, who does the animal belong to? The Kohen. It's a Kohanic animal. Therefore, can eat truma. Kohen shesach apara mi Yisrael. But I will say, Allah Lamaisa, a Kohen who rented apart from Yisrael, afa pishem izono seha alav, even though the Kohen has the obligation to go in and feed the animal, lo yachilena karshine truma. You can't go ahead and feed it truma. You can't feed it truma. Then I both say, now this is very interesting. Why? Even though in this case the Kohen does have responsibility for the animal, yet what? He's not allowed to go ahead and feed it truma. So say, so what do you see from here? You see from here that even when you have responsibility over things, that doesn't automatically entitle you to truma. If that's the case, that even though the Kohen has the responsibility for the nichseit son barzel, for the avdei son barzel, why does that enable them to eat truma? To which the Gemara says, well, 1 second. When you borrow something from someone, Tizbara, Nehinami demechai begneva va'aveda, ba'onsel, bekachasha, or benifchas dameh mi mechayiv. So we'll say, 1 second. When you borrow something from someone, Rabbi say, or I should say, it's not when you borrow. This is not a case of borrowing. This is a case of schirus, of renting. When you are a renter, does a renter have complete responsibility over something? And the answer is no, right? A renter has responsibility, for example, theft or loss. But let's say, again, a lightning bolt came out and struck the cow dead, right? Is the renter chayiv for that? And the answer is no. That's called an ones, an extenuating circumstance. So perhaps the only time we say that the Kohen enables the Evet Truma is when there's complete responsibility. This is not a good comparison. Halo Damya, our mission is only comparable to the Seifa. What's the Seifa? Here we go. Yisrael Sham Parami Kohen. We'll say here's the case. the Yisrael went ahead and rented a cow from a Kohen, but the nature of the rental was that they assessed the value of the cow, and the Yisrael guaranteed the value. So for some reason there's some diminution in the value of the cow, I agree to make you whole. So what's the halacha? Lo yachileno karshine truma. In that case, the Yisrael can't feed the Kohanic animal truma, because now the animal almost kiviyachol becomes the property of the Yisrael. Aval Kohen shesham para mi Yisrael yochileno kashini truma. But ultimately, again, if a Kohen goes ahead and rents a cow from a Yisrael and guarantees the value, halacha l'maisi can feed it truma. Yosef, so we'll say that's a more comparable case. Yosef Rav Yosef, Beshili Pirkei de Rav Nachman. So Rabbi and Rav Yosef were sitting together at the end of the Shir Rav Nachman. The Yosef Amri, and they came along and they said, Tanya Kavasi de Rabbi Yehuda, Tanya Kavase Rabbi Ami. There's a Brayso Rabbi say that supports both of these opinions, the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and the opinion of Rabbi Ami. We'll say we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up a Meretz Hashem with these Braysos tomorrow, and we'll say we'll get to the resolution of the sugya. Really fascinating sugya. Meretz Hashem resolution tomorrow. Shkoyach.
Second quick question. In modern day Orthodoxy, right now,